Welcome to today's virtual Gradulting Workshop. As you know, we are recording this workshop, and before we get started, I have a couple of announcements. The Grad Student Legal Aid Office is still here. We are still operating, and we are busy. If you have a legal issue, Zach Mundy, our attorney, is meeting with students by email, by phone, by Zoom, and our grad student advocates, Tara and Simone, are helping students who have been charged by the university. And next month, May 13th, is our last day for immigration appointments with our immigration attorney. I think we have 2 or 3 openings still. So if you are interested in appointment, a free appointment with our immigration attorney, please go to our website and click on the immigration tab, and you'll see the instructions for how to do that. Let's see. That's all I have for announcements. Let's just move on to the workshop today. We are going to answer the question, how do I create a business plan for my startup? I am happy to welcome back a speaker who's been with us a few times already. Her name is Holly DeArmond, and Holly is with the Business School's Dingman Center. And they do amazing things that she's going to tell us about. But Holly's been with us for a couple years to talk about business plans, and she always gets rave reviews from our students. So Holly, thank you for being with us today. I am going to turn things over to you now.
Okay, thank you, Debbie. Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me. I'm very glad to be with you today, even though we are virtual. I do enjoy giving this presentation and meeting the grad students, so I'm glad to be here. So Debbie, I'm going to share my screen, and if you could just verbally let me know if you are seeing it correctly. Are you seeing my PowerPoint now?
I see it. Yep.
Okay, good. So it sounds like I'm all set.
Can you click on the slideshow, because we also see, there you go.
Is that better?
Yes, it is. Thank you.
Okay, and so I saw that we had less than 15 participants today. That's great. So what I can do is I'll leave time in the end for questions, but since there's sort of less than 15, if you do feel the need to ask a question immediately, you can interrupt me or raise your hand, and I'll try to call on you. But like Debbie said, I'm Holly DeArmond. I'm from the Dingman Center for Entrepreneurship over at the Smith School of Business. And our mission is to help students launch their ventures. And so we work with any student from across campus, not just business school students. We also work mostly with undergrads, but there are several grad students that use our services as well. And so what we're going to do today is I'm going to give you a little bit of an overview of the Dingman Center. We're going to talk about the business plan approach that we take at the Dingman Center, and within this I have some deep dives, time for Q&A, and then I have some references and suggested readings. So that's the agenda. Before I move on, I do want to introduce you virtually to my team over at the Dingman Center. And we have our founder, Rudy Limon, who's a former Smith School Dean. He founded us in the late 80s, so we've been around a long time. And then we have several Dingman team members who focus on really venture creation programs. That's really what we do. We also do some speaker events. We have a pitch competition that we're doing for the first time virtually on Wednesday night. And so this is the team that is executing that. I always like to highlight for grad students that if you're at the level of needing seed funding, so you've got customers for your venture and you want to raise a round of funding, Stan Smith on our team is who you would work with to learn about venture investing. So anything from starting an idea and launching it to then getting venture investing, we have someone on the team to do that. So a little bit more about me, since I'm your host today, is I've been at the university 13 years now, and I started in university marketing. That is my professional background. My career has largely been spent in marketing and communications. And so when I work with startups, I often work on go-to-market strategies. But as the leader of the Dingman Center, I am trained in working with entrepreneurs on a wealth of things. I am not an attorney, so those of you who submitted more legal questions, I'll direct you to our legal experts because that is not my expertise. But I'm passionate about this university, getting to know Terps, helping students, connecting with alumni. So that's who I am. And in my role at the Dingman Center is really leading the team in the strategy and the fundraising components of the center. So, and like I said, our mission is to help students launch their ventures, and we're equipping the next generation to do that. We also do a lot in the connecting space. So when we meet entrepreneurs like yourselves and you say, hey, I'm having a manufacturing issue, a supply chain issue, a legal issue, we have a very broad mentor network that we can connect you to. So a lot of what we do at the Dingman Center is just meeting with students and connecting them to those who can help them move forward. And we also leverage our faculty to do research and to publish, just like many on our campus. That is also part of our mission. So that's who we are. But today's session, and I want to be mindful of the time. Good, we're at 1:10, about where I wanted to be, is I'm always asked to come and talk about the business plan approach. Now, when I come and do this live, I bring booklets to everyone, and we really work through a lean startup guide to launching a venture. But as we've turned this presentation and this session virtual, we've sort of changed it a bit. And today I'm going to be focusing on how the Dingman Center really works with students to create a business plan. And the two ways we do that is we work with students and entrepreneurs to produce sort of two deliverables. One is an executive summary and one is a venture pitch. So when you're launching your venture and you're talking to people about it, potential investors or banks about loans, one of the first things they're going to ask you is, what's your business plan? What is your revenue model? How are you going to make money? And really the place where you can dig into that is your executive summary. Now, once you move into pitching actual investors live and you get invited to angel groups or VC firms, they're going to expect you to have a deck. So these are the two things that we work with our students really hard on, typically over a semester through our courses and through our workshops. But today I'm just doing sort of a 40-minute overview of what these things are and the elements that you're going to want to think about. Now, one of the questions I got when you all, submitted your pre-questions was, don't I land on the idea before I produce a business plan? And that is absolutely right. We at the Dingman Center really focus on the lean startup approach, which is getting entrepreneurs to product market fit before they even create a business plan. That's not what today is about, but I do have a lot of information I can share about ideation. This session's more for those entrepreneurs out there who already have an idea. But you're right, the person who asked that question, you never want to move forward with any sort of business plan or venture pitch until you have really landed on what we call product market fit. You've proved that there is a market, there are people out there in the world who want to buy your service or your product. So I'm going to dive into this. And like I said, the approach is that I'm going to take you through the sections of an executive summary and venture pitch, give you some pointers on how to get to that information, and then leave some time at the end for us to answer questions. Okay, I'm going to move this up. So when we're teaching venture business plan creation, we use a sort of tried and true model that has been set forth by Sequoia Capital. Sequoia Capital is a venture firm in Silicon Valley who a few years ago started releasing some of their best practices and content for pitching. And so we've been using it in the classroom, and we use it with our entrepreneurs when we're working with them outside of the classroom. But essentially, here's the flow. Here are the elements that as an entrepreneur, you're gonna have to dig into and develop for your startup. Now, you're gonna see this in Sequoia Capital form, and then I've got some notes in blue, and I'll dive into a few things. But essentially, you're always starting with your company purpose. Then you're moving into problem and solution. That's very much a lean startup tactic. Don't focus on the solution too much. You have to make sure that it's a problem. You have to understand that problem and understand how your solution delivers and will be bought into by your market. Always want to ask why now. Do a lot of market research. Competition is an obvious bucket. Many of you probably could have assumed. There's all kinds of things to consider when you're thinking about competition. Then what is the product or the service? What is it you've actually created? How does it work, and how will it fulfill the needs of your customer base? We'll dig into business model, where we'll talk about revenue streams, we'll talk about pricing and those types of things, and then team and financials. So we'll go through these sections. I've pulled in some examples in some cases for you to consider, and then we'll move into Q&A.
Can we ask a question now?
Sure.
Or at the end?
Sure, go ahead. Yeah.
Can I go to the previous slide, please?
Yeah.
One previous. Okay, so you said that Sequoia, this is what's published by Sequoia. Is there like, would you say, suboptimal advice here in terms of like something missing or like something that we shouldn't do? Because you're kind of like negotiating with the venture funds, right? So with these type of with negotiation type situations, if you have information that, if you have more information from the other negotiating party, you can have a better negotiating power. So like, what's your take on that? Is there anything that should not be included here or should be included in your opinion, any section?
So first off, this is not a negotiation. This is a pitch. You're not there yet. So these are elements that you would include when you were pitching a VC firm or an angel investor. You're not to negotiating terms yet. That's when you get into term sheets and things like that. We're not diving into that today. I'm happy to talk to you one-on-one, but I can point out as I go through some things that angel investors and VC firms will dig into. There are elements that they'll take a deeper dive into and sort of test you on, so to speak, more so than other elements. So I can talk about that as well. But my overall, sort of before I dive in, like I said here, slide decks tell a compelling story concisely, and you're usually creating beautiful imagery and interesting data sets for people to visually look at, while executive summaries can dig into that detail. So let's see, we're going to go ahead and get started now. So the first thing you want to dig into, like I said, is the problem. You want to describe the pain of the customer or the customer segment that you're reaching out to. And one thing that we like to say at the Dingman Center, and you'll hear it a lot as you read more about startups, is you want to fall in love with the problem before the solution. Investors and people evaluating your business want to know that you understand the problem fully before you even came up with the solution. This is hard for first-time entrepreneurs, especially those who have felt a pain specifically, and they've created an app or a service that's very personal to them. Sometimes they skip the part of going to the market and seeing if it's a broader problem and how different people, find solutions to that problem. But you're going to be a lot more successful if you can clearly state in 1 to 2 sentences the problem that you're addressing with your company. And then that leads you've identified this very clear, concise problem, and then you're going on to the purpose of your company. Because of this problem, I am addressing this, or I am addressing that. And when you're talking about a slide deck or, presenting a PowerPoint to, to a firm or a group of angel investors, you want to, make sure it's a clear and concise statement. But in executive summaries, like I said, you can go beyond the one sentence power statement and you can kind of dig into that. But, you've probably heard in startup land the idea of an elevator pitch, and that is often what you're putting on your company purpose slide. Now, solution, this is where a lot of, entrepreneurs definitely live. You want to demonstrate your company's value proposition to make the customer's life better. Show where your product physically sits or your service, will be used. A good way to do this is to, use use cases. If you've got a story or a use case where your solution makes a lot of sense and really kind of hits it home for people, you'll want to pull that in here. One thing that we try to tell founders to think about is, a lot of times founders will get the question, is this a must-have solution or a nice-to-have? So is this a product or service that people must buy, for their health or their wellness, or for the financial stability of themselves or family? Or is this sort of a premium nice to have type of offering that people with disposable income might opt into? So those are the sort of things you're going to want to think about when you're thinking about this. And so I did a deep dive here because I wanted you all to come away with some questions to ask yourself to get yourself to your value proposition. And what you really want to, I'm going to hide these videos. There we go. And what you really want to consider is the reason why customers would turn to one company over another. Why are customers going to come to you? What value do you deliver to that customer? Which one of the customer's problems, are you helping to solve? And then you can think about some of the main elements that you could probably pick up from startups you've seen launch is elements that contribute to value creation or newness. Is this a novel approach to something? Performance, customization, maybe it's you're entering the market at a cheaper price. So price usually plays into it with new companies. And it could be something like accessibility or usability, a convenience factor. But you're going to want to take a very deep dive and try to answer these questions to get to your value proposition. Because if that's not clearly stated, it's hard to get to the next steps. If the audience, whether it's investors or a bank you're talking to or friends and family, even for a friends and family round, if they don't understand your problem solution and the value you're creating, it's hard really to dig into the rest of it. So these upfront elements are very important as you think through what you're creating. Now, we are going to spend a little bit of time digging deeper into market size. The reason I'm doing that is when we do this presentation, most of our questions come in market sizing. So we're going to spend probably the next 5 minutes me talking to you about what market sizing is. And, we always say to students, there's no, better time to try to launch a venture or start an idea than when you're a student. And there's a lot of reasons for that. One of the big reasons for that is that you have access to market research that you don't necessarily have access to once you graduate. So as grad students, particularly now, there's the virtual business library where you can get access to things like Wall Street Journal economic reports and Gartner reports, these sort of market research firms who are producing the leading content on different sectors and industries. You can get that through your UMD library membership. And once you graduate, they start charging you for that stuff. And so typically when we do this with students, we have a contact at the library. Her name's Lily Greiner. Some of you may know her. Who's really talented in helping entrepreneurs focus on market research. But essentially, as an entrepreneur, what you're doing is you're identifying or profiling your target customer. And many, especially if you're going after venture capital, they're going to want to see this pie approach. They're going to want to see a total available market that is the most people that you could ever think to sell to on planet Earth. That's the biggest part of your pie. They're going to want to see your serviceable, available market, which is sort of the middle part, and then your serviceable, attainable market, which is those who are going to be the first sort of adopters or first users and first customers of your product or your solution. And in my following slides, I'm going to go into all these three buckets in detail. But what I'll say as far as, sculpting the plan in the executive summary, you can go into more detail on your customer from demographics and psychographics and their buying habits. For your venture pitch in a PowerPoint, you're going to be wanting to show it very visually and concisely. And the examples I pulled for you will definitely show you that. But our deep dive into market sizing is first, we're going to look at total available market. And like I said, this is the potential at scale. This is not your potential when you launch. No one's at TAM when they launch, in the first 6 months. This is after you've been in business for several years. And if you think about projections, this is usually at year 4 or 5, when you're really at scale as a company. This is the people, the customers you can reach. And so as you're doing your research to see how big your industry is or your potential customer size is, you want to ask yourself, how many people could possibly use this market? How large would it be in dollars if everybody bought? And how many units would that be? And especially VC firms, definitely also angel investors, they want to see big markets. That's really what puts them over the edge when they're evaluating companies. A lot of times they're really, how big, what is the potential for this market? They're looking for billion-dollar markets or multi-million-dollar markets, something that's scalable, repeatable. Now, how do you find this out? Like I already referenced, the first step for any entrepreneur is the obvious one, just Google. Is what you've come up with or the problem you're trying to be solved, addressed by anyone else, that's going to come up in a simple Google search. But like I said, as a student, you can get access to industry analyst reports from Gartner, Forrester, Wall Street Journal, Goldman, Morgan Stanley. All of those firms submit their economic reports and their industry reports to libraries. You'd have to pay for them if you were a graduate, or maybe the company you work for would have them. But as a student, you have access to that. And so that's really where you can't ignore the total available market when you're thinking about it. Because like I said before, you want to think about this like a pie. So that's really where you're starting. And then you're going into your serviceable available market. And this is short-term potential. So think about, year 2, year 3. Year 1 is going to just be, those first adopters, but where are you going to be in year 2 and 3? And what segment of the TAM is often you're looking at geographical reach. So when I explain this, I always think, if you're a product that can be sold worldwide, maybe your SAM would be the mid-Atlantic. So how are you going to capture the region with this service or this product? Then you want to think about in that region, so think about the Mid-Atlantic, how many in your region have the money to buy this product? If you're a premium price product, if you're something very expensive, there could be some geographical, factors in play and places you would launch before others. But if you're coming in and competing on price, that's not as much of an issue. So how large would the market be in dollars if they all bought, and how many units would that be? You want to ask that for every section of your market sizing. So how do you figure out what your SAM is? You talk to potential customers. This is often hard for first-time founders, but this is really where you have to get boots on the ground, show that entrepreneurial hustle, talk to potential customers about what you're creating. Talk to them about the problem first, see what they say about the problem, and then also talk to them about the solution you've created, and see if they would potentially buy it. You have to ask those questions. But really, yes.
I've heard that when you ask potential customers if they like the product or if they're interested in future developments, what the product can become, they usually respond pretty positively. compared to how they act under, real market circumstances. So how do you account for that while you're having these conversations with people?
Yeah, you don't want to create questions that are focused on your future. You want to really ask questions, about how they currently solve the problem. That's how not how the pie in the sky they wish they could solve the problem, but how do they currently do it? And that can give you insights to how they're actually spending their money. So like if you think about so one of the examples that I use in here is Airbnb. I think everyone knows what Airbnb is. It's sharing economy, you're renting rooms from people. But when they were first launching, their first adopters were people who stayed at bed and breakfasts, because people who stayed at Marriott's or hotels were not really, it was gonna be harder for them to switch those people. And so they were very focused on who they talked to and who they assumed that their first customers were. Now, like you just said, if you're talking to someone and they're talking, you're talking about your problem, you're talking about your solution, and they're going on and on about, oh, that would be great, that would be great. You always want to bring it back to, okay, how are you currently addressing that problem? Do you currently pay for this? If it's someone who says, yeah, I would pay for that, you want to ask specific questions. How much would you pay for that? And you can leave it open-ended. You don't have to say, would you pay $50 for that? You can say, okay, how much are you willing to pay? You seem excited about this. So willingness to pay is also another way you can kind of wiggle in there and feel like, are they really a potential customer, or they're not, this is not something really they would in the end, pay money for. But you should just try to be specific as possible. Yes, sorry, I heard someone talking.
I just said got it. Thanks.
Oh, okay, cool. So the smallest piece of the pie is the SOM, and it's the portion of that SAM, that serviceable available market, that you think you can capture initially. Like the example I just gave you, Airbnb knew that their initial customers were going to be people who were already staying in bed and breakfasts. Now that ended up not being who they scaled with. They scaled with sort of a younger audience, a younger demographic who wanted a more personalized approach to travel. But when they initially launched, it was a replacement for the bed and breakfast model. But anyway, so your SOM is that portion of the SAM that you can get initially. Who are you going to sell to in years 1, 2, and 3? How many customers is that? How large in dollars would that be? And again, this is where you can also start. I said, talk to potential customers is how you can find out, but you can also start talking to channel partners or competitors. A lot of founders are nervous to talk to their competition. Now, if you've got some sort of novel or IP, intellectual property, involved in your products, then you do need to talk to a legal expert about filing patents. That's absolutely true. But there is no reason you should be afraid to talk to competitors about the market. So like Airbnb, if you read about their case study, they talked to a lot of B&B, bed and breakfast owners. They talked to hotel owners, and they talked to them about how people rented rooms and the challenges. And so you really want to not be so afraid, and you can craft really, I would encourage every entrepreneur, before you reach out to competitors or channel partners, that you sort of type out or write down what your questions are, so that you are being strategic. But don't be afraid to do that. And always talk to potential customers. We have a course where we require students to talk to 100 customers in 3 months. And it's tough, but it is a proven way to figure out product market fit and to determine market sizing. There's just no way to do this without getting out and talking to people. This is also where I address the caveat of surveys. A lot of people want to take care of their market sizing and their customer development through online email surveys, through SurveyMonkey and whatnot, but nothing beats talking to your customers, either going to the environmental places that you think they'll be and trying to talk to them one-on-one, or setting up Zoom calls or phone calls Nothing replaces actually talking to people. A survey can be helpful, maybe initially, but you're gonna have to dig down and start talking to customers. So I'll just go back, but I think as you're thinking about your own startups, you just always want to think about this from, you know, this sort of piece of the pie sort of mentality. I really think this is the easiest way for you, for founders to think about their market sizing. Again, like I said on this slide, do not underestimate what you have access to as far as industry and market reports at the University of Maryland. The data is out there, and you should take advantage of it. Okay, so that was market sizing. And I can take more questions at the end, but at 1:35, I am going to move on. So competition, this is pretty obvious, but it's always something that investors, potential investors and VC firms want to make sure you understand, you know, how you're positioned within the market against a competitor. And they want you to include direct and indirect competition and show that you have a plan to win. Never forget, you know, don't just slap up there who your competition is in that story. And then when you're writing your executive summary, make sure you're clear about how you have a plan to beat them. Investors and VC firms are going to want to know that. Anyone you're trying to get funding from is going to want to know that. And you want to think about this through listing out or, you know, determining what your competitive advantages are. Those are distinctive factors that are favorable to you. And listen to the next phrase, hard to replicate. That is something that I think a lot of founders, I watch pitches all the time. And at the end, there's always a question about, okay, but how hard is it to replicate what you've done? So that is something you don't want to forget in your executive summary and in when you're pitching this business. So typical ways that you would lay this out, either in an executive summary or in a pitch deck, there's the quadrant here, where you would list your unique advantage 1 on an axis and a unique advantage 2 on the other axis. And where you want to end up is always the top right. You are the highest and best at whatever those advantages are. Now at the bottom, I listed some pretty typical advantages, you know, because these are so tailored to your company, but a lot of times these will fall in some sort of tried and true buckets. Are you competing on speed or accessibility or size or features or price? It could be, you know, intellectual property, you know, you're the only one that has the authority to do this or the technology to do this. Talent is another one I see. We see that a lot in our region because we have a lot of startups in sort of the cyber space and the defense contracting space. And a lot of those founders have military background. So they've got this sort of specialized training that is making them unique. Another place that talent really plays a key factor is in medical devices or biotech. If you're a physician or a researcher and you're an expert in an area and you've created a startup around it, then talent is your unique advantage because you're the founder and you have the expertise. So there's a lot of different unique advantages that there could be out there, but those are just some examples. This table is another easy way I see a lot of, especially we see it a lot in student pitch competitions. It's an easier way for founders to kind of think about it, is where you would have, you know, 3 to 5 unique advantages up top, and then you would have your competition plus your company on the left-hand side, and you just put a check mark around. You're obviously going to have check marks in every category because these are your unique advantages, but then your competition should not have check marks in every category. There might be 1 or 2 that are competing in 2 of your categories or multiple categories, but if you fill this out and everybody has a check mark, that's not a unique advantage. You can also show that you really have done your research if you can be very open and honest with the people you're talking to your business about your competition. So if you know that someone is coming soon with one of your advantages, you're going to want to put that on there. This goes back to the question of, is this hard to replicate? And you can address that within this. But don't be afraid of competition. Like, people know that, you know, unless you're new and novel, there's some sort of competition out there that you're going to have to address. The example I like to use here is Uber. So when Uber was first, there's a business case about this, I think, that they cover in the MBA. But when Uber first launched, their only competition they said they had was black car service. You know, the cars that you would, you know, rent in advance, the Lincoln Town cars, to get from here to there. They didn't think that taxis were their competition, or that people's own cars that were calling friends and family to come pick them up was competition. And they pivoted really quickly to know that they weren't just a niche product, that they really had a solution that could be mass market. And so they would have to find a way to beat taxi cabs. And of course now, you know, they, you know, compete with one another. Uber exists, taxis exist, you know, renting limousines exists. And I know Uber has some problems with their business model, but that's just a really real example to give you as far as thinking about competitors.
I've heard that for the case of Uber, they said that their competition wasn't taxi, so that they wouldn't get blocked by the local taxi licensing legislation. So
yeah, and then what happened?
Something.
They had to address it because there was no way they were going to enter in New York's market or markets like DC or airports without addressing it. So yeah, I mean, they hid from it as long as they could, but eventually they had to address it. So that's right. So we're going to dig into business model, and this is really where, you know, we could spend hours on this. We teach business model over whole semester long classes. So I'm getting ready to give you a really fast forward crash course on business models. But what you want to think about are these 5 things, what a business model is. First off, it's your revenue model. It's how's your company making money? How are you pricing your product or service? What, you know, how big is your account, are your accounts? Are you a business to business company where you're selling into big companies, or are you a business to consumer, you know, company that is selling to consumers? What is your sales and distribution model? You know, you've said how much, you know, you're going to charge, but then how are you going to get to those people? And then, you know, really going deeper into who your pipeline is and how you can really capture that pipeline. But essentially, a business model is how does your company make money and how will you capture the market? So revenue streams are, you know, represent the cash a company generates from customers. So this is the money part. You have to address this if you're going to be a for-profit entity. If you're going to be a nonprofit, I think some people asked about being a 501c3. This would be a totally different approach. But if you're going to be a for-profit company, you have to be able to address your revenue streams. And some companies have multiple revenue streams, but usually startups typically only have one when they launch. But some questions you want to consider when you're developing your revenue stream is, what are customers willing to pay? You can figure that out, you know, if you look at what they currently pay. So for example, on Airbnb, they looked at what people were paying to stay at B&Bs and the different markets they were going into, like San Francisco, LA, New York. And that's a good place to start. When you're thinking about revenue generation, like I said, you can make money in lots of different ways. It could be an asset sale, you're selling a product or service, a usage fee, a subscription fee. So a lot of apps will have, you know, the subscription fee model. You could have a licensing approach, advertising, which is another way apps make money. We see that a lot. But the equation for revenue is just widgets, you know, whatever you're selling times the sell price. That's just the simplest way to explain what revenue is. And those are sort of the bullet points up top are just what you want to consider when you're developing your revenue stream. To make this real for you, and I think I sent the slides to Debbie and I put in the notes some equations for this. But essentially, this is an example from last year's Pitch Dingman competition winner, Aurora Tights. They produce tights for dark-skinned ice skaters and dancers and gymnasts. And so this was what they pitched and won on in pitch Dingman competition as their revenue. They determined based on their cost that they were going to charge $22 per tite. They determined they thought they could sell roughly 8 to 12 tites per year in that first year, making their total revenue 198. And so that, and then they had a separate SKU. So they had ice skating tights and they had dance tights, and dance tights cost a little less. So the revenue on that per customer is going to be a little lower. And then something I'm not going to dig into it today because, getting to profit margins is something that, people spend time on in finance class. But that is something that the BCs particularly want to know. What your margins, like how much of the revenue are you taking home? And like I said, in the deck that I sent Debbie in the notes section of the PowerPoint, I put those equations in there for you so you would have them. So, Jasmine, the founder, set up this is what my pricing strategy is. This is my pipeline. This is how much I'm going to make. And then she went into sales and marketing, and she talked a lot about how she would onboard these. She thought in year one she could get to 10 teams. She also thought she could do several hundred online sales. And how would she get to those sales? She would get to them through paid media. So she set out for the viewer, or the judge in this case, the judges panel, how she was going to tackle sales and marketing. And then, because this was her strength, because of connections in her network, her pipeline was really strong. She had an uncle at the Redskins. Because of her experience in ice skating, she had contacts at the Olympics. So it was really important to her to show the judges panel and also angel investors she was pitching at the time that her pipeline was strong and deep. And she did that with this slide. And that's really, if you think about what I set out here in just 3 slides, she clearly, stated how she was generating revenue, her pricing, her account size, her sales and distribution model, and then her pipeline. And so it's not as daunting as many people think it is in the beginning. It's not easy, and we can help you through one-on-one appointments sort of dive into this, but that's essentially a really great example of a first-time founder laying out with her first company how she was going to tackle the business model. Team is something that you do want to consider early and often. You want to think about yourself, like, why are you positioned to be qualified to succeed at this? Is it some sort of expertise you have? Is it a passion that you have? There's got to be something about you that's going to move this startup forward. You'll hear, if you listen to podcasts, if you read books on startups, you'll hear investors saying, oh, I always bet on the jockey, or I always bet on the horse. So it's founder versus startup. And then some people say, oh, it's a mix of both. But you do want to think about yourself as how you're positioned to really make this company successful. Now, I see this a lot, especially with the students we work with. They'll come with a technical idea, but they'll say, hey, I'm a Smith School finance major. I've got an idea for an app, but I don't know how to code. I don't know how to build apps. Okay, the first step you need to take probably is finding a technical co-founder or someone on your hiring a student to build out the app for you. You have to address, don't let it stop you, address it. How am I going to fulfill this expertise that I'm missing to move this startup forward? Now, if your founding team is pretty solid, or you've got, expertise in multiple areas of the business, you can think about filling those holes through boards of advisors. So a lot of the mentors at the Dingman Center will serve as a board of advisor member for a lot of our startups. They formed into a mentorship capacity with the student, and they're comfortable with doing that and moving forward and being a board of advisors. This shows people that you know how to get really smart, qualified people bought into your idea. So you do want to think about early on, who are those advisors that are going to add value, either with their experience or their name or their connections. So in Jasmine with Aurora Tights, that example, I told you her uncle was at the Redskins. And so he was one of her board of advisors because he had expertise in the sports industry, which was her industry. So don't be afraid to go to your friends and family and see who might be able to go on this journey with you. If you don't have friends and family, you know, just widen your network. Networking is key to any successful entrepreneur. So you can get out there and really find people who can help you. And as a student, the Dingman Center can be there to help you. The Dingman Center is listed on a lot of decks out there for students pitching ideas. So that ends sort of the content, and I flew through that because we only have an hour and I want to leave time for questions. But I do encourage you to check out the Airbnb slide deck. I included the link here. It is a very simple slide deck that a lot of founders use to reference. You'll see that they address every element of this slideshow I took you through in a clear and concise, visually appealing fashion. I also included the link here of Jasmine pitching Aurora Tights so that you could see a live pitch. So that's a video recording of Jasmine delivering that pitch. Now, next steps with Dingman. So this was sort of a fire hose of content, but hopefully this is your first step with us. Every Friday, even when we're virtual, we're doing it virtually now, we have office hours from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. with two sets of people. One are just general mentors, general advisors that can offer general feedback on any kind of business idea. And also, we always have one legal expert present as well to offer legal advice to students. So that's something that you can elect into. You can find the sign up link on our website at the Dingman Center. You can also just email me and request a meeting, and I can help you as well. I do encourage you to read and listen to founders. We at the Dingman Center have our own podcast called Dingman Bootstrap, where we interview TERP founders and investors and people from the startup world. I do that with Joe Bailey, so you can listen to that at that website address there. Also, NPR produces How I Built This, which is a really interesting, it's a really interesting startup podcast, but it's with founders who are advanced. Like he has the founder of Whole Foods on there, and the founder of Allbirds Shoes, and Cliff Bar, like big brands. So I think that's a really great podcast for you to listen to. You can subscribe to our newsletter, where we highlight regional events and activities for students that they can elect into in DC and Baltimore. Before I take questions, these are the references. I do encourage you to go onto Sequoia Capital's website and check that out. Also, the Airbnb slide is on there. There's a good site called the Business Plan Shop, where we pull a lot of our market sizing information from. And then these are suggested readings and online sites that could be useful when you're at the beginning of your journey. So that's it. I will take questions now.
How do you compensate a board of advisors? Do you give them like shares, money, or is it like an unpaid internship to become a board of director member, kind of like a internship style job interview, like an example? Why do these people advise?
Yeah, so they're seeing some sort of potential in you. So your question covers two things. So board of advisors are not interns. Board of advisors are experts, tried and true, successful people who have had success in your sector. So these could be, so like I said, with, Jasmine, she's the founder of an athletic apparel company. So she had people from an athlete, someone from the Redskins. She had someone from the Ice Skating Olympic Committee on her board of advisors. And then she had an advisor on there that had expertise, not in athletic apparel, but Bob was an expert in sales and marketing. So she just identified these experts in her world that could help move her forward. She doesn't give them anything in the beginning. You should not be giving anything away at the very early stages to an advisor. Now, if that advisor spends 12 months with you and has really provide a lot of benefit, you can offer them some equity. That's pretty typical. Board of directors are a little bit different. That's,
So is it more like tipping in some sense? I don't know. Like,
I'm sorry, I don't understand what you said. What?
is it kind of like you know, if they help you out for this extended amount of time, is it, you know, do you compensate, you know, the compensation that you give, is it kind of like tipping in some sense? Are
No,
you
you
like,
don't pay, advisors.
well, you said you give them equity, which is, you
I
know,
said if they spend a lot of time with you, you can start offering a percentage of equity. But at the very early stages, in the first 6 to 12 months, if an advisor is asking you for equity that early, I would really put some second thought into that. There's enough advisors around who should, be willing to spend a little bit of time giving you some advice in the first 3 to 6 months. And then if they really are adding value, then you can start, forming your operating agreement where that you're giving them a little bit of equity. Now, internships are different. So like I said, in the tech model, if you are a business person and you need to hire a technical intern or employee and you have no money, you can pay them in equity. So, if they're working for you, if they're operating for you, you can offer them equity. Does that make sense?
yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I say that because I want you to empower yourself to be able to work with people and ask questions of people, and find the people who really want to help you in your startup before you start down that road of, okay, if you help me, I give you 3%. That might happen down the road. You'll give small percentages away to advisors. But if you're early stage, like I said, be thoughtful about that. And none of that should happen until you have formed your operating agreement, which you should definitely talk to a legal expert about. Our legal experts that come in on Fridays are very well equipped to handle any kind of operating agreement questions you might have about who equity splits, and how much, stock options, those types of things. You want to talk to a legal expert about that.
Holly, this is Debbie.
Yes.
There's a question in the chat that I'll read for you. It says that you mentioned that the Dingman Center's mentors include legal experts. I'm currently a freelancer and would like to expand, but this would mean learning more about 1099 contracts. Is this something the center would be able to help with? Thank you.
Yes, thank you for your question. Yeah, we could help with that. Our experts would know. And yeah, they so some of the firms out there that work with startups will have these sort of basic packages and operating agreements that can help you figure out those questions. So yeah, again, I'm not a legal expert. I'm not going to advise you on that, but yes, on Fridays you could sign up for an appointment and they could direct you. I can read some of the questions I got from when you submitted. When is the best time to write to start your business plan? I would say after you've found product market fit, after you've talked to enough customers to determine there's, a market out there for what your product or your service, it's time to start digging deeper into really what your business plan is. How to create a business that appeals to a specific target audience in a specific area, like a niche business. Yeah, so that a lot of times a niche business, while it doesn't have that $1 billion market size, is a little easier to tackle because your markets are going to be smaller if it's a niche market. Now, that's not saying that you can't make billions of dollars. It just might not come from billions of people. So yeah, I think, the way you would do that is you would just go do very detailed market research on that specific target market. You would stay true to your purpose and only create a solution for that target market. But yeah, doing a niche product is fine. As far as worrying about, there's some questions on here about taxes and liability. You definitely, like I said, once you've kind of formed, you know, your thoughts and maybe an executive summary of what your business is, or at least you've captured what the problem, the solution are going to be, you do want to talk to, and as a student, you know, we have the free legal office hours, but someone who can help you through operating agreements. Y Combinator and Cooley Go, which I included on your reference tab or your reference slide, they have some samples of those online and you can just read them and learn what they are. But yeah, I mean, those are the types of things that you don't necessarily need to worry about up front when you're doing all of your market research and your customer development, but eventually you are going to have to worry about those things. How do I get financing and backing from an angel investor? I basically just showed you the model they're looking for when they consider giving you funding. As a TERP, we have an angel investor network at the Dingman Center, so that's always a first stop for any TERP. But there's angel networks in the middle, in DC and Baltimore, and then there's VC firms here as well, but most of them are in Silicon Valley, New York, Boston. But we do have VC firms locally as well. I'm running out of time, and I do have to drop off at 2. But someone asked, you know, platforms for online presence. There's, you know, Squarespace is great. You know, there's a lot of, you know, options out there to create your own websites and things like that. So anyway, I will turn it back over to Debbie. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now, if I can get my mouse to work.
All right, Holly, I know you have to go. Thank you so much. This was an action-packed hour. And once again, you've reminded us that the Dingman Center is a great resource, not just for business school students, but for all students at the University of Maryland. So yeah. I hope everybody found this useful. I hope everyone starts a new business and uses the Dingman Center. So please give us your feedback. We will be sending out the slides as well as an evaluation later today. And if you have any legal questions or any issue and you're not sure who can help you, please get in touch with us. We can help lots of people and we make referrals when necessary. So thanks to everyone. Stay safe, stay strong, and we hope to see you soon.
Yes, thank you. Stay safe.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.
There you go.